and you also look at displacement. You can understand why people always revolt. So if you look at Kombola Bereberola, what is happening is a land dispossession mechanism that government injects on the people. So near Molo Boila Tarablato, Niman Tablasodo. The only thing they can do is to revolt. But sometimes what they do is, let's say you put in a touristification mechanism where all these areas are being touristified and all the people living there, baby bunyang la loka ninku kotang ita ka jelo ko man kunyi society kono koteng na soto bulo manta sinni noja ya sound la kotang te yela korda waf bara ba wete meta waf ita ibela do man no loka ndami inana ofan de ko ye wulndi ni ye wulndi ko te beta mun dol. So it's not that people are resorting to some of this violent conduct because it is the first available option. But nimma sakunda buka kan quota option of famo dila. It all can ala bungo boy doro. More be munakela. Inila dimba be la bandal. The government is injecting homelessness on our people. Kombo bebe deri mo be Kenya mala kokuta keri. They are injecting poverty on our people. Ibe enjoy yandika mfamo la satelo kono. Ano mini be nyima sakunda pala so itale la satel to yake woto.
Yeah.
So wala mutilimbali ate mi yalon ko afoka kolea bara wala mutonyati. People will leave their communities and then come because they are in government, they have political authority that they could make decisions to remove you from your own house in your own community. And they will come and own those lands. Simply because they are the government, they have the power and the authority to preside over things. Wala atinankweko politiko mobile hajoti. Kukuma balo moti.
Akumara baga.
Kukuma balo moti.
I have this issue with my checks, I mean, you could have a political say political whatever. But every SGM law not nana ustas or no parliament they protest. That shows that it is an important thing. It should be a matter of business. It should be everybody's business.
Ntaka fo molela ko political na dunia balu obetendi wala katu ko ke bitrong along ko political decisions le okay kenno. Nim politician ol dunta tapale kono sate dunta fitino kono hani alabatu do ta kenola.
Exactly.
Yeah, so everything is dependent on political decisions and choices that politicians make. But until Gambia minimum fahamu wale they have more commitment to politics than people mini alonko wala kalamta because ndolka ajelo ko politiko man na faso time we so lonkane fam batandije but wo fam batandi ko nyi wala kantola banko samba that decides your faith and my faith, that decides what you put on the table, that decides your salary, that decides the kind of education you get, that decides the kind of healthcare you get, what more be money phone, that even decides the land you own. Isula da kaito leka da jumale ay kala folo kondolle tam jande na kabilo tam ngamira hani la kabilo hani alkalo min fon tamala land takata ke mun dol hani alkalo mi satelo na sulata ala lan kela to yala kata mun dol
masakunda
ngo bebe dendi masakunda ni political la katu masakunda political le wal sindi ando masakunda le be mararim bankola woto sayte ba fono la nyaade ko ndata political to andu te masakunda la ko to katu wolle be mararim bankola ni mo samba police le be masakunda isa sa de be masakunda la ko ni be moto borandla silo kanjuma la ko silo da dai kela na mo jo min ya wollo masakundati what a political mumbela hajol the funding kill wal nyanta wala understand ko even the land you are going to live on tomorrow decisions are made by politicians, so it should be everybody's business. But I mean we need to understand that the touristification process or the touristification of our communities by government through the TDA is not bringing meaningful development to our people. Wale atina dobi je kalafika mul kaja vikavo ko ko mondi no le katu lan wa folle katu fen ko la tengi mala fi so be yala, they put that stigma on people, but ni nata jibe kumbola tari koto because it's a touristified area and mostly people mol nim tubabo la ko ka dunyo kono bake modol ka jikolo ko om kalanta yal tin tolman so be ya karamo ni ku koto wala bare karannal be fare mul la ko mbo berebero ka.
Yeah.
But because there is no unification of our people where they look at things and look at how we are being treated by governments that come into power. And that is not regionalism or whatever, but it's important that we look at the diversification of our development because development in the Gambia is centralized. So that stigma of telling boy combo in serious katulan wa for like a land moro. So long land becomes a commodity, it depends on what I want to do with it. But that does not justify somebody coming and then seizing our lands and, of course, brutalizing our people because they have power in governance. That is why our people need to understand. If control la molka fende ni Africa for ko tanalon kara nyol kereten. We control la molka munati maso. Moro alembe to nyala fonu la nyoye. Amanke control la mole mankara ngi man fahamu. Bara ni wandi mole da malle be masakunda e bal joyandi la alfa wala satel kono. Wala be caring. Why didn't they take tourism development to other regions? For tourism manyana futala what? For Baben to the River Gambia all the way down. Munat ne imang will be a TD80. Ila satel to munat ne man TD keje. Andolla musolla gadi no libolle beti nyale ka mining di fangolla molla lansino lan tol fanga buka kuke no fangolla bankoka. Ani they bring in all this to our communities ni sun kan ko jam wam moro hanila bungo fang anila luo fango te buka sinoje. That is abusing human fundamental rights in our communities. Ñine buka dankan to la lanil da matambul bare kan jo yandim fangol la sate kon kan lal fango tinya to a point that you see the insupportable burden of environmental degradation in those communities is just absurd. It's something that nobody can deal with. We don't even have an ecotone between some of the communities and the ocean. Ecotone is simply like a buffer between the ocean, like a sand dune buffer between the ocean and the communities. But bela muta ka clear ka banko beef. Ika mana dolo ka bila fani ni ebul ko no fenge bela fala futala jiola.
Let's get into environmental damages now. So I mean, Doc, near that Jibe Gad, before Gad, that was something like Gilcon. Gilcon and Gad, they were doing signing simultaneously. And let's start with Sanya. Then Minala now, all the way to Burfoot. Sanya ni tara Sanya B, as we are speaking. Nika dunka da barato. Ibeka cross no nyata imam salendi wala ke salo wala bridging ni wala ke yekata mini wala. Nya bulubaji be abemu dinko ni jol. Nya maraji be abemu dinko ni jol. So there's a one time tara na mero tra la garden or dino ba ma ko kan jibondiro. And mero da malaji just like less than 10 meters by 10 meters. Oda mara to daje pour kala jatol fi anin ko don. Mero wo sitanye. Abin akonya ko sanjitan komando jang gadino be ka fa molla mol kana kila balo so da jang e kara kila dimbal balunde ka kar mo jodi ni wale. And of course pour kaje ko da pass of any contribute towards that. But today wo mero kere mol mi anako they were forcefully removed from those areas because of individualistic interests of those minus the government and some people within the cabinet, notable even politicians. We will get into that. What's your take about this mining issue?
Yalong name typical komodino de nako do moro yolon and injuru sabo.
Yeah.
Because in Tolong all along. Most of our parents you would have seen in one way or another moro olka bolu la nako leto. Masa gadi no long aning kunkili na gadi no long aning nako to because nako do and then they go supply into la kotamol. But I mean nata ke na balu be dendin no wala. But neither narrate would la towel bulu. Iman kudo provide what are you compelling them to do? To die? To just sit back and die? Kata jumala be sino la balu okoma. Yala what a kenola. Baratul man na fon ku kende fo ran man na do ku bundal yele wole falka na kele land be mine ka be samba ando mine ko okay fon muna fon min ka muru na wasate ko na dan ka do ya abuka sotofa
na abuka sari fon na fa it doesn't reflect on the life
and our people are keeping quiet over it, but they got to speak about them because among get tilumati among get tonyati ngo ndala nga mining company jemin yalon ko they should be put in checks and balances by geology. But the geology la molla ko nya tonka ya kada community le fongo ya community convince pour yedula di nyimole mining kaji ko the geology ba do ko kan jumalle nyi mining company le ban fo Gambia
the bourgeois.
I remember when they had to do a mining in Bruford, it told like all nya tonka ya pour ka mol fon convince, and they even came with an EIA document that came from another place. Imagine ko EIA min keta sanya ko ibu na kai to use la to do a mining in Bruford. Does that make any sense? Even if there is uniformity or there is no heterogeneity in terms of the land areas, it's not the same place. Every area you are going to do a particular activity needs to have its own environmental impact assessment. So long it is demarcated that this is 20 by 20, 20 by 20. You have to do a studies for this one and do a studies for this one. There is no, even if there is ecosystem homogeneity, there is no population homogeneity because more members about it in Sanya, so they are just very basic sciences. But Tilimbali and intelligent Kamira control they can use them to do certain things. They are not only just destroying our ecosystems, but even our fruit trees. na kuto fingol nin ku kote wala say wala be buka sodo no because in kol sodo no ndami yo wala be boy wolta even our bird populations will be affected because kunol katara muna bala katara yiro nin forest la bala nali wala be tinyale dula be mine muna betal laje. This is going to increase urban heat. Urban heat in the sense that if you look at cities and the way they should be developed in terms of biotope area factors, and having like, green spaces and green belts. What time we know to low combo berebero, what I can do with santol to because forest on the sort of running ball fanam bije. But no bad la silang guys at Rajam Farinya be giola. Because what time we got Rajam Farinya buka Georgia, because all that you basically see is the forest before you actually get to the ocean. But near
Mancalol and other stuff there.
Exactly. So what is happening? They're exposing us to the intensity of the heat, and of course our communities will be heating up. But we are not really looking into it because some of these natural resources like sun, Ngamini used to do construction, they are not forever. Like deplete we do not have a regulation that controls construction in our country. Moro, the resource you are using is a natural resource. Nite wajam fandi wanyama just because kodo le bete bulu bare akabona ndame abanda jele na banda je wotamba shotala mundole. Also, you see people many along they don't even understand the environmental circumstances. Walka ajelo ko ninga na korda lo nga korda mume be tile. The korda mume be tile. Tiles absorb heat. Nin sama na da jio buka lo itala korda kono because now you have subjected to impermeability. Everything need to move as runoff. Ni mo boy okay la korda kono sa jio bebe borla la ita ba kono. Yamara munela bo holo be jio sotla because the groundwater need to recharge. Well, I think that every household, no matter what, needs some, direct contact with the ground so that the geo can duma. Kadwofana has a role to play there. But but that exposes ignorance of what life is all about, because the green space helps you to recharge the groundwater aquifers. But is going to run as runoff, because then impermeability is what exists in that house. Imagine every household does that, and every water that comes into our country actually moves as runoff into the oceans. How are you going to actually get your boreholes recharged? We are not paying a lot of attention to. And then even na banko mol batandi kan jawkel nin kando sita kando igena lafa ko dal kono simply because everywhere is just impermeable. Injio na geo be bori jita loan wala jita dun no la banko kono because everywhere is impermeable. Hani flower to dol buka dol ka banko bari ni euro boy man ni euro kela bungola ni nya fa fankele wala ni nya na fala wala when you cannot even have some green space within. So we need to focus the minds on basic environmental practices that are very necessary in keeping our ecosystems balanced. What time when kaja korda kono ni ularo si de kaja kuno dol bije kamera ko ni wolbe korda kilini. Because every ularo they come back in the morning, they go. Moron tolla yabe nu wala nyama. Marsale yiro be boy kadulal betinya. Gambia back then when we were kids, ikaja le somonda, ika kuno dol je ka bori kata kato mafongola. Ularo yeje murunna.
Yeah, ularo around 6-7 mavo.
Exactly. But still no even at the airport there are bird whatever bad strokes with the airplanes, and because the airport has a forest ecosystem. So the birds will have to go to where they can survive. Imagine you want to destroy the monkey park near Otinya or the bird species and life. If you destroy let's say Tanya Bird Reserve, so these are the things that we need to understand, that life in itself is interdependent and interrelated, and each of these species have a role to play. So wala atin antolo kombo berebero la manyan na sonna mulka na kanadlal be tinya, and after near tinya roka foko pare, they will not backfill them, they will not replant them, and of course they will not put in any regenerative mechanisms.
And there is always an agreement of rehabilitation, and these are some of the things me alno ko ikasade mol nyaku wala at the beginning, because nyara jibe jilkon there was a agreement on rehabilitation pour kaje kadlani 50 dada ni pare da manin ila sulo ke je sanji jama kabi pare de yodlani tu nya. I mean God natanang. The same thing happened for God. Min fon kala that was a day janim binala na tiba wotara bara do ba sirin je ba coffee e ba fenko min ka drinko ne nyinen kai ko nyako nka 5 la but because ko kunu dola ka so da tu jaren akana tu jaren da male stand. So I attended a mobile con. But as it is for ularo aseda among kunoje because manakara mankalo min be boden now gachi will be a bit graded that will be moved, and now they are even extended to go beyond a diamond lansino diamond dealer pour kaje go combining. And then some of the things me and you call back when it comes to the issue of bribery, because some of the community members, me and they are working in cahoots, and then we were labeled, we were called names, we were threatened and stuff like that. Sometimes it come because because you are informed, Malmo is informed, he's an environmentalist. You understand a bit about environmental damages and some of the things that are actually going to happen, when these people go away. So if you start talking about it, it becomes an issue.
I know very prominent people from Tujara. Tujara move satel to me along ko karana jama bota je mo kende babota je mo farmasalim babota je. Dolbe masakunda dolbe that. I work briefly with my big brother who runs Fandema. Mala.
Yeah.
Those are people who are doing phenomenally well. And I think at one point he was involved with the VDC. Mr. Bojang is from there. I was in the same class with Yankuba, who is medical doctor, and a lot of people. I know Pa Usman Jaju is from there. I know the director of
that's my ilo though.
Oh, Pausman.
Yeah,
that's a phenomenal person. I've met with him in a couple of international conferences, and and as well, we got the director of water resources. So tujara nyol amanga controller sa telephone to come fahambal molle be jemini alon ko fahamta fatambida. So the whole point now is how do you bring all this expertise together to actually see the betterment of the community? Because ninyi mining ka foi parete any mol kamenda minna ko they have to do a rehabilitation. Then it is the responsibility of the National Environment Agency that gave them the environmental approval to make sure that they fulfill the conditions of the environmental approval. And among that environmental approval conditions is to rehabilitate the place because of the EIA document they sent. I'm an EIA expert, so I should basically know if I do an EIA for this community, what are the mitigation plans that I put in place, that at the end of what they are doing, how are they going to really, restore that ecosystem. So Niwal Baby Okonosate participated in the development of those, EIA documents. The community should be able to hold them to account that then we take you to the National Environment Agency, meaning environmental approval or deal. But if everybody sits and say, hi, but document then the VDC have a right and a mandate whatsoever to actually hold these people to account restoration but not to live everywhere like that and then move to another place to go and do whatever they got to do. Mining cannot be stopped. Let's be very honest here, because we need sun, we need to build, we need to actually live in houses. Mfana nyanda alon naloko ha malla fale dula tinya malla fi dula tinya tinyar nyala mi yalo noko ata dala no kotengi anu nibe kukele je nibe fenta ala fana be fenna dulla mul wala ni pareta fana ba da kulal ngam ko demi sodla. That is sustainable development. Now there is a difference between conservation and of course preservation. Now we conserve land in a way that you utilize it in a sustainable way. What you preserve you don't touch at all. And we are not saying that all these ecosystems should be left untouched. But whereas they are being utilized, then it's need to be conserved in a way that it is going to be utilized in a sustainable manner. But how do we resolve this? This is very easy. Now you have VDCs and then you have subcommittees that are responsible for, have a subcommittee responsible for natural resources and of course the ocean front and all of that. We need to have community task forces that work with government entities to ensure that there is sustainable utilization of our resources and of course not leaving our communities with so much burden of degradation.
But what if VDC themselves become complacent? I mean, if VDC themselves are being
every member of the community has a role to play.
Exactly.
So accountability is always who accounts government. So even the structures of our governance, all the way to local government, all the way to community level, nun to loika avoko kabila karinyo le follow sida la kabila alfa le betulo fenke yala jande moro nyaton kaya sate nyaton kaya manyana kala kita kuti silande anyanda kala minti min fahamu ta sa keno sa sate mol bonni no kukono asa ku bonni no afankan asa ku bonni no sate mol kan para ka avoko kita nyaton kaya manyan ke kita kuti ko tenkedi we've passed that stage. We should be able to identify people who have the ability to run our communities for betterment. Not for the sake that karma malenyi satelo kamera ko keta ko nyaton kaya manke keta kuti if ala na fulo de so keta no if ala so on keta no but sate mol maranya wonyanda kala de mol de mi alon ko ay more long I sate tarambulo long and I along fanasa mimbo as a kubon no sate kasa yuru asa mano sate kanda sate as a lono sate mole ni lo wato sida, but not just for the sake of kara ding wala nyinti wala kara la sare fen koloni. That is important in one way or another, but that is not the most important aspect when it comes to community development and participation and leadership. So nyilom kultimin yalong ko often we have faults in there. Ani walang baro sa ko mo rin nga president. But one thing,
Mane mano sa member Japan.
Okay. Anyway, today we're trying to talk professional. I don't want to get
Yes.
into politics.
So I mean, we're looking at the issue of still number mining and nita about the same thing. But to tell you the fact, I was on the ground. Minke ke problem with the jama ya fanyami they work in cahoots, right? Geology nita je complain is just useless. Nothing is going to happen at the end of the day. Some VDC members or some VDCs also are in in cahoot with those in those bushwas mini al noko wala kam mining ke wodla. So in an event that you're an activist or you're not activist, sometimes you know the things that are happening. But the thing is, these are the VDCs mini al noko. I mean, they have never seen million in their eye. So near 1.5 million, they level 500,000, they have a million. God call again. God can have 500,000, they 2 year and call wala sanya call wala bada kunga wala football field lowe. In Natalo de Busanya mere for Ninkel Beta Sino, Domoro Konofa. Forgetting about the damages are coming infiltrate in the society. And another thing is they're not even aware about God-led revenue. God, it can mean so the revenue, it around 23 million US dollars. Is a lot of millions in dollars. Even you can even say billion in dollars. At the end of the day, throughout this mining community, could have been so the job fancy. I become Marcelo Sade, ibaga Karambulo Sade, ibaga Sade din sponsor Karamundo, ibaga Laptando Sade, ibaga Bosa Sade. At the end of the day, I mean, even the revenue, even the royalties, meaning Kadinya Sade, because Sade funding.
But another thing is, if you look at natural resources governance, it might not be even the community to come and make a request. We need this or that. I know they do pay a lot of money to area councils. Now, mune area council balikafoko, 1/3 of that money should go back to the community that these resources are coming from for community development. Money atina area council buka murun nang nyi mining company ka kudo royalties mini bejo itolia purka aje ko community fana maybe let's say 25% of what is paid to the councils come back to the community where this is coming from. So nyinlom kutimi alonko accountability does not just start between us and these mining companies, but mini alonko the area councils who are involved are actively participating in it. Welcome munnafankula murundi nantolla satel kono. Welcome kula to mini alonko we need to ask, because all of these things we have seen, the local government commission which talks about millions and millions of dollars is that were embezzled at Brikama area council. But antolla satel te ka bondi wolda to muna atin okudo buka murun nan kan yurwa ko samman antolla satel. Gach might not be in the position to do all of this because they might have, a corporate social responsibility, and that's what they could do. But if actually the area councils have monies that these people pay to, they're paying tax and they're paying all the payments that they need to do. How about paying 25% of all those monies back to the communities, and of course initiating, community development projects? Because wafang mitola do quote. But ni buko okay do itolo ko dol dunni muntol ni atra munafanga bo sate minto. Mol ke muna fangala wala alu yurwa ko fana sambo sate do dal ko do fana beta albu ka hanu fene murun wo sate dal da mala murun ko dal ko do fana besunya ka do wala je the local government council olto. So wala nan ko dolla nyum ko mo bere sate fon nyanta wulla la fon ka rabri kama area council ka tandila kon ko alkan na fengol min be fenge ka ko do di Allah ko no al ko do murun nan ka do ko ken na sate ko. We need at least 25 to 40% of those monies coming back to our communities. Otherwise, you are just subjugating us and destroying our ecosystems, and then you are not there to make sure that these people do the right thing. So accountability is not just because of the mining company or the Carlos in our communities. It goes beyond that. It's the councils, it's the central government, it's geology, and all these departments. It's the NEA, it's the Ministry of Environment. All of these institutions have a stake. And in one way or another, they have to actually, integrate efforts to make sure that there is sustainable utilization of natural resources in the Gambia. Otherwise, we will continue to have these conflicts emanating once in a while. But what temple to me instead of solving it, they will not do it because we have a government that is not proactive, is reactionary, and then being reactive on most of the things, you will never actually get it right. That's just the point. And land issues, not just in the combos, is something that definitely needs a lot of attention. If you go to, like, let's say Serekunda or Mafangol, the major fenko e ka fa nya dile bade ko min bo ma fa ngolon jo swante
Yeah, just one cemetery.
ni wod la fara di bera mol badi lam nga ika jela mol gela mol bondi ke samba santo satel iba jela wati binala mol fa kila ibela hada mol badi la dami fa be kolal because ika jela mol ka estate lo ka dulal bello ibike mira karamola ibike mira playground la ibike mira little green space la ibike mira fengo fenna ka dula be waflo nga be ke kordadi sai hada mo dingol ni fate be ibe sudura la mon dol jami wala fa dol bi je ibike mira la fa mum dol mum hada mo di sifalle ñun lam ko mi yalon ko but ñi manke mini yalon ko be sadel ko no responsibility ngam mini jo salary la that is their responsibility kaje ko ñi satel everything that all these estate developers put all of these things into consideration. If your estate is almost over 1,000 or 100 houses, then you need to have a mosque, you need to have a space for a church, you need to have a space for badeko, or you need to have a space for honey waste dumping site, a basic transfer station. Fight lab is simply and squarely on failure of physical planning. Will be a derby jelly. Because we need to have these institutions working together. But a new world monkey, like in the sector I work in the United States. Look at we have to deal with the Environmental Protection Agency. We have to deal with the OSA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration. We have to deal with Chapter 33 of the labor law, or let's say the DEB, Department of Building. You have to deal with labor laws. So it's like all of these institutions will always come for inspections and all of that. Kaje ko min nyanta kala walek. Moro, Gambia lo kaje jang mo wora wala be kuram polo mo be fata je.
Yeah.
Moro ni wakera ndola company do yala sa indabe talla kasola.
Sai. And geo bond store.
And we would have exactly.
And store geo bond ika caution
exactly. If there is a little pollution, I don't want anybody to come to a job site and not be that's a big issue. Let alone, queer kill, but a molka fagambia because of occupational related stuff. Molka fahan in mine inside will found. You can't do you better make until by kaja mobe kabona quaredo, mola fada je. But if father nyadi all of these quarries need security. They need environment, health, and safety. But I will be mantra kirin to la banko kan. Ika moja sera bunya wasanda fong is not even tired of ye jolon nanje fadre afoko. Butong alalom bawon to loko mundina dunkele. There are a lot of things that can be prevented in that country. So we feel act like a crude or a very raw country that should definitely progress and advance beyond the level we are. But National Environment Agency they are seeing, occupational health and safety related problems that are happening. But how about we develop, a law that actually protects people who are working in these informal sectors? But ajama babi jabukan na ken na sa din mo takake mo ko tangol la wala betala be payroll push le ba sound la wala tin na dulala katinya because we don't have our own people monitoring and evaluating the activities in most of these areas. And then all these sectors should definitely hana darawa kala para fulalti. O sector ka kodo min bondi wodla we para tanjono. Let the sector pay for itself. But
Jambele time or para katra mining areas or even two years. I remember I was very young at that time, but would make us black sand man para because of
yeah. But they also make sure that the people who are working there have their protective gears and then motor, fanyala mi along coming silot. But I just want to mining kemi along tapalian in Tilimbali bije. But you know what happened in the Jammeh regime? Jammeh kind of gave a lot of mining license to his personal relatives.